Yeah, I think I wrote my first article about 1MDB back in 2016 when the Justice Department was pursuing a number of civil forfeiture actions involving 1MDB.
This is Tom Fox. In today's episode, I visit with Stewart Bishop from Law 360. Stewart is currently covering the Roger Ung trial in Brooklyn. He has covered Roger Ung in the pretrial phase and 1MDB since 2016, and it's a great conversation around his literally gavel-to-gavel reporting on this case. It's fascinating, and it's one of the few FCPA cases to go to trial. I know you will enjoy it. Thanks so much for listening. Have you ever thought about the intersection of tax and compliance? Well, I had not until I did a 5-part podcast series on Taxman with Tracy Howe. Check it out on the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and you are in for a treat today because I have with me Stewart Bishop. Stewart, as I know him, is a reporter with Law 360, and he's been reporting on the Roger Ung trial, but he's been covering it for a lot longer. So, Stewart, first of all, with an incredibly long-winded introduction, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Stewart, could you tell our audience your professional background?
Sure. I got my start at the Boston Globe, working nights and weekends, covering street-level crime, public safety, and any other local news that needed doing. After I joined Law 360, I bounced around for a little while covering various aspects of, or different areas of law, like employment, antitrust, intellectual property, before I settled on white collar a number of years ago.
So now we're going to get to the fun stuff because we're going to talk about Roger Ung and 1MDB. I won't ask you to review 1MDB. I'll only say it's been one of the most delicious scandals that I've ever been able to read about. I've been following everybody's work on it. And Roger is not the main player, but he was potentially a player. And unfortunately for him, it looks like he's the only one who may ever go to trial in this matter. So could you tell us, you've been reporting on Roger, his trial, and this matter for quite some time. What's been your involvement in the Roger Ung and greater 1MDB matter?
Yeah, I think I wrote my first article about 1MDB back in 2016 when the Justice Department was pursuing a number of civil forfeiture actions involving 1MDB and Joe Lowe. Most of those have been settled, to my understanding. But I didn't really get all that deep into the story until late 2018, early 2019, when Roger Ung and others were hit with criminal charges, both here in New York as well as Malaysia.
So what intrigued you on the pretrial side of things? Because that was pretty crazy, too.
One thing that kind of jumped out at me was the similarity to another case I covered in 2019. That was against a shipbuilding executive named John Bustani. Incredibly similar fact pattern in that case. It involved about $2 billion worth of state-backed loans from Credit Suisse to the government of Mozambique, supposed to go to fund maritime projects, but about $200 million of which went to pay bribes and kickbacks. That trial went on in the same courthouse as Roger Ung is facing trial right now, and interestingly, resulted in an acquittal on all charges. After the trial was over, I spoke to jurors in that case, and they told me they had acquitted him based solely on venue grounds, which was unusual. It's very similar, it was an FCPA case or FCPA-like case, also in the Eastern District. And, as far as venue goes, you can definitely tell the prosecutors in the Roger Ung trial are taking a belt and suspenders approach to that question.
Well, that brings up a great question, which is why is Roger Ung, who, as far as I could tell, never permanently worked in New York, on trial in New York for an FCPA case?
Well, you've got the fact that Goldman Sachs, is headquartered in New York. In a lot of these cases, as far as venue goes, what they base that on is the fact that these transactions were conducted in U.S. dollars and as such utilized correspondent banks in New York. So prosecutors assert venue that way. They also, assert venue based on electronic communications involving people in the U.S. And in this case, both Roger Ung, Joe Low, and also Tim Leissner were in the U.S. During the time of the alleged conspiracy. So I think that about covers it.
How is the Department of Justice's approach to venue in this case different than what you saw in the Bustani trial?
Well, in the Bustani trial, it was honestly kind of thin. It really relied on the correspondent banks that were being used for U.S. dollar transactions in that case. And the defense put on a pretty good witness to rebut that theory of the case, just kind of saying that, there was no actual physical money that changed hands. This was kind of just, one banker talking to another banker and each making little notes in their respective books. So in this case, they're definitely dotting the I's and crossing the T's, I guess you would say.
For my sins, I'm a recovering trial lawyer, and I've tried probably 50 cases. And if you can get a witness to admit on the stand he's lying, or you can catch him in a lie, you think you pretty much won the case. That does not even begin to describe what I've read you report on. And so I wanted to maybe start off asking you just how wild has this been for a white-collar criminal reporter to sit in and watch what I've been reading you report on daily for Law 360?
This has been, without a doubt, one of the most complex and strange trials I've ever covered. As I've written before, there's really no doubt in my mind that, a massive crime occurred here. It's just a matter of who is responsible. We can start with Joe Low. I could write a book on him himself. He's an interesting character. He popped up in the U.S. press back in 2009 when the New York Post reported on this mystery Malaysian man who was just blowing through gobs of money in the New York club scene, leading an extravagant lifestyle. That interestingly, later raised red flags at Goldman Sachs when they were considering taking him on as a private wealth client that they did not. And then you get to Roger Ung and Tim Leissner. Leissner's testimony was just bizarre. Covered dozens of trials, and, cooperators are always flawed, but Leissner is just exceptionally so.
I have met a couple of fraudsters in my life, and the last one I met, I walked away. I knew they were a fraudster, but I thought, I really like this person. I can see why they're so successful. Is there any of that in Leissner, or is he a completely different can of worms?
It's hard to say. I wouldn't say he came off as all that likable on the stand. He described just years and years of his, living by kind of like a code of deception. He was just kind of a serial liar, both in his professional life and his personal life. So, maybe he talked a good game back then, but he did not come off as sympathetic.
So I recognize the prosecution had a very difficult case, as you suggested, whenever you have a cooperating witness. But how did you assess the direct testimony of Leissner? Did you feel like the government was able to get the message it wanted across?
Let's see. He was really, by far and away the key witness in this case. And, on direct examination, he really, made all the connections. He's the one who ties Roger Ung to this whole scheme. And, again and again, he was on the stand for 10 days. Over that time, he made sure to, tie Roger to every aspect of the scheme that prosecutors were alleging. Probably the most memorable part of his testimony was when he described this meeting in London at Joe Low's residence, which was kind of like akin to a mafia sit down, where the bosses come together and decide what's going to happen in a scheme or a crime. And, he described how Joe Lowe produced a sheet of paper and wrote down all the people that would need to be bribed in order to ensure these 1MDB bond deals went through. Direct examination, he hit all the bases. It was somewhat of a different story on cross.
We're going to have a quick word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back.
"93% of your life is spent indoors, but so many of our favorite moments are outdoors. Fresh air, the feeling of peace. Warmer weather is almost here, so make the most of it with Outer, the new outdoor furniture company with purposely designed furniture to get you outdoors more. Everything Outer makes has a 5-star resort look and feel for less than you would pay at a big box store. Outer makes the world's most beautiful, comfortable, innovative, and high-quality outdoor furniture, all from sustainable materials. Outers has perfected the outdoor sofas, chairs, and tables that feature stunning modular design to customize your space. Life-proof material with a nano coating that's water, mold, bleach, and stain resistant, plus UV protected. Triple memory foam cushions that are comfier than most indoor sofas. And Outer's patented built-in outer shell cover protects your furniture from rain and dew. It's the "how did no one think of this before" invention that made Shark Tank's Lori Greiner and Mr. Wonderful fight to invest in Outer. Check out Outer's stunning furniture for yourself with a virtual tour or in person at one of the thousands of neighborhood showrooms. Outer furniture comes with best-in-class warranties and a 2-week trial with free returns. See the difference for yourself at liveouter.com/C-Suite. Plus, for a limited time, get $300 off and free shipping. This is Outer's best offer anywhere. Only available to podcast listeners and only for a limited time. Get $300 off and free shipping at liveouter.com/C-Suite. That's liveouter.com/C-Suite. Terms and conditions apply.
And that's what I would like to turn to next, because we often hear the term withering cross-examination. I've seen someone on the stand for maybe a couple of days, but that completely, first of all, that description pales to what I think you saw. And two, he was on the stand for an incredibly long number of days. So I'd like to maybe get your impressions of the cross-examination, and then did you feel like the defense was able to poke the holes they needed to?
It's hard to come away from watching that cross-examination without concluding that his testimony kind of went off the rails. He admitted to be married to 2 separate women at 2 different points in his life, and forging divorce documents, admitting to numerous extramarital affairs during that time, including with the daughter of the Malaysian ambassador to the U.S., a Goldman Sachs client, and that kind of bolsters this defense theory that Tim Leissner is someone who uses intimacy to, get ahead in business and in life. And the most memorable moment for me was the testimony when Leissner said that he impersonated his then wife, Judy Chan Leissner, by setting up a fake email account in order to correspond with his now current wife, Kimora Lee Simmons, who's a reality TV show and former model, in order to make Simmons believe that he and Judy Chan Leissner were no longer together. And then that, that sort of went badly. He was a little too convincing. Simmons Leissner started asking Judy Chan Leissner to, have her kids and her join her and Tim on vacation, which then Tim had to come up with another number of excuses to get out of that. And, another thing that struck me on cross was he was pretty evasive. All cooperating witnesses are they bristle a little bit when getting questioned by defense lawyers. But Leissner kind of took it to a whole new level. He, was just drawing blank after question, drawing a blank on question after question after question. To take one example, on direct, when describing the London meeting with Joe Low and Roger Ung and others that I mentioned earlier, he described that encounter in such extraordinary detail, talking about who was in what room and, who took their drink order and that kind of thing. And, it even got down, like he described in extreme detail the doorbell of, to Joe Low's condo, and you compare that with cross-examination. He's asked about all these key meetings, trips, conversations surrounding the scheme, and just drawing a blank. And despite the fact that he testified he met with the FBI over 50 times prior to trial, he apparently remembered little to nothing about any of those transactions. So his evasiveness was striking.
How did you assess the judge's attitude during the trial? Did he, play it straight? Did you see the judge really become exasperated? And I want to keep the discovery dispute out of that because I want to maybe touch on that separately. What did you see in checking out the judge and that sort of thing?
Judge Brody, it is Judge Margot Brody. She's the chief judge right now of the Eastern District of New York. She has a pretty calm demeanor for the most part. Compared to a lot of judges I see, there's been no tirades from the bench or anything like that. She was an assistant U.S. attorney in the Eastern District for about 13 years before being nominated to the bench by President Obama. And, to a certain extent, I think that history as a prosecutor shows.
Now let me turn to the discovery dispute. And once again, I'm reading your reports of this. So I've been involved in those. I understand sometimes mistakes happen and sometimes bigger mistakes happen. And this seemed to me to be a really big one. When I read your first article on it, I thought that the defense would get a mistrial. Or at least a continuation. They did get some time to review the documents, but what was your sense in the courtroom from the discovery dispute?
This has left me really kind of baffled. As I reported, amid Leissner's direct examination, prosecutors disclosed this major mea culpa. They said that more than 15,000 non-privileged documents, including material from Leissner's email accounts and laptops, had been wrongly withheld by a filter team from Maine Justice that was tasked with reviewing discovery for privileged material. And, that came on top of another 120,000 documents that weren't disclosed to the defense until after openings in the trial. And, at the time, Judge Brody called the omission, troubling, disturbing, and the prosecutors themselves called the discovery failure inexcusable. And most memorably, Assistant U.S. Attorney Drew Rolls said it was a total institutional failure. That was kind of the end of it. We haven't heard anything since then. There's been no apparent consequence for the government. And that kind of stands in contrast to a few other cases recently in New York federal courts, where prosecutors have really landed in hot water over discovery Brady violations.
How do you assess the jury's engagement at this point? Do they seem interested, engaged, taking notes, not taking notes? How do you sense that from the jury, at least at this point?
Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to get a read on the jury in this trial. The press and the public are not allowed in the actual courtroom due to COVID-19 restrictions. So we've had to make do with a closed circuit video feed of the trial. So I unlike normal trials, I can't really, get a read on the jury's reaction to witness testimony and the like. But from what I'm told by attorneys and others, they do seem pretty engaged. And one thing is they consistently show up on time, which I can tell you is definitely not the norm for a lot of trials I covered. So there's that.
So can I maybe turn a little bit to your routine? What's it like now that I know you're covering this remotely? What's it like to cover a trial remotely, and sort of what's your daily routine? Run back to wherever you type up today's article or today's report and get it to us for the next day, or how does that all work for you in Law 360?
Well, I'm still at the courthouse every day. We're in an overflow courtroom watching the feed about 2 floors up where the trial is taking place. It's definitely been grueling. As I said before, this case is incredibly complex. Just trying to keep track of the money trail where everything's going, it takes a lot of work. I will say, though, this trial is coming up on 2 months. The longest trial I ever covered was 5.5 months with 22 days of jury deliberation. So I think I've been prepared for these kind of cases. Just sometimes the sheer amount of information that's being conveyed at the trial is almost too much. I've been covering this case for like 2.5 years, and I think I have a better idea than most about what's at stake here. But there have been so many times that me and other reporters, we have a press room that we work from in the Eastern District Courthouse in Brooklyn, and where we go back after the end of the trial and we end up, just talking to each other and trying to get exhibits, from the government or the defense, and just trying to nail down exactly what we've just heard.
Well, Stewart, unfortunately, we're at the end of the time for this episode, but I was wondering if our listeners wanted any more information on yourself, Law 360, or on your reporting. What would be the best way for them to find out?
Well, you can read all my articles at law360.com or in your email inbox for those of you who subscribe to our newsletters. You can also follow me on Twitter at Stewart Bishop. And if you want to check out somebody else who's done a lot of coverage on this trial, I'd recommend taking a look at Pat Hurtado's reporting for Bloomberg News. Both of us have been doing so-called gavel-to-gavel coverage of this trial.
Well, Stewart, I wanted to thank you for what you've done on this trial, and indeed the coverage of pre-trial and during the trial. It's been, frankly, a lot of information, but more importantly, a ton of fun to read. So I know we're nearing the end, so I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to your wrap-up. And I'm sure you thought about this, but I really hope you write a book about this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your reading.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. I hope you by now have checked out our 5-part series on Taxman, on the intersection of tax and compliance, which appeared on the Innovation and Compliance podcast series, also on the Compliance Podcast Network. It's an area that is not often discussed, but it's something that every compliance practitioner needs to be cognizant of. And I hope you will use that podcast series to go down and talk to the head of tax at your organization to see how tax can help support compliance. The FCPA Compliance Report is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.